Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is my lovely co-host, the chattering teacup.
Hello.
And here with us from the cold of Canada, Alexa Whitewolf. Hello Alexa and welcome.
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. It's wonderful. And like I said before we started the recording, let's dive right into your books because to describe them, we need to use the words romance, fantasy, paranormal, and suspense. How and when did that happen?
I mean, I've been writing since I was very young. So when I was 12, 13, I think I started with just writing some ghost stories. Mm-hmm. And the wolves, I sort of stayed away from a very long time, like the vampires, because I was like, this is very cliche. A Romanian author writing about werewolves and vampires. You cannot get more cliche than that. But I was reading a lot of paranormal at the time. Mm-hmm. And, you know, one morning I was writing something completely different and these four guys popped in my head and you could not shake them off. I tried. Believe me, I tried so much. But Dom, Finn, Tristan and Lucas were just impossible to get rid of. And it turned into a 4-book series. Mm-hmm. Then it turned into a short story collection of origin stories. Mm-hmm. Then it just sort of expanded beyond that. And every series in the Rogues universe that comes up, they somehow pop right back in there. So yeah, it's been a fun experience, but I would say that it started, I'm going to blame my husky for where the story started from. Because the way my husky walks, his name is Achilles. He's a fighter. You can kind of tell where Dom came from. And he's very much one of those dogs who, always picks a fight first and foremost, but he also walks like a wolf. So in the middle of the night on the snow, he's just walking like a wolf nonstop. And I remember this one New Year's, must have been 2017 going on 18, because I think 2018 is when I first published Dom's story. And we were walking fresh snow, tons of snow, obviously, Canada. And, Achilles was just being very, very wolfish, and he started chasing after a bunny. And this scene popped in my head. And I came back home and, it's New Year's. I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, some champagne. I couldn't really sleep. So by the time, I sat down in front of my laptop, all I remember is, going to sleep at maybe 7 a.m. the next morning. And, I'd had already drafted like a good chunk of the book, and it sort of became one of those, I have to finish it. So yeah, it was, I think I set absolutely every other story aside, except for these guys. Like it was just, need to get them out because they're really annoying me. Like I would be, at the time I was working full time. So I would be in work meetings and I would just have, like one of them pop into my head and I'd be like, please don't.
So they can be quite annoying at times, can't they?
100%. I would say I've met my match in the vampire series that I started. That's also, like part of the same universe. But these guys were they were extra. Still lovable, but extra.
Yeah, I got the impression when I read First to Fall that they are something special indeed. Absolutely. I mean, they are likable. For werewolves, they are likable.
Cuddly.
Yeah, cuddly werewolves.
Cuddly?
In some way, you could say they are cuddly. I mean, I'm not the dog person per se, but yes, quite. To be honest. Yes. I mean, you said being from Romania, you tried to avoid the cliche. But on the other hand, who better than someone from Romania to write about all these legends? I mean, you incorporated already in First to Fall, and you may I say, or would it be correct to say that you put a new spin on the werewolf and vampire myth, legend, or fantasy?
I would like to say that I did, yeah. When I grew up with these stories, right? Like I was such an avid reader as a kid. So I grew up with these stories. And where I'm from, the Transylvania region, in Cluj, it's um I I'm not gonna say everyone is like that. My immediate family, we were all very superstitious, and it's very much filled with this whole sense of, we believe in the supernatural, right? Like we believe in, if you walk under a ladder, X thing will happen, whatever you do on the first day of the year is gonna follow you along the whole year, that kind of stuff. But also I spent a lot of time in the woods near my home. And I was always that tomboyish girl, like just sort of going out, and it's like I don't know how to describe it other than saying that the legends really live in the earth over there, like they're just everywhere around you. So yeah, like when it came time to writing, one of the things that I wanted was not to write the typical American werewolf story. I also wanted to stay away from, I mean, I like my werewolves alpha, I like them to have an attitude, but I really wanted them to have healthy relationships, At the time I was in a new relationship myself, and my my then boyfriend's sister was very young, and it just sort of hit me, like what are young girls reading nowadays, in these books and whatnot. So I wanted to do a mix of incorporating the legends that I grew up with in a way that's interesting to the new generation, but where there's also, like if they're reading it for the romance, they're also getting a bit of a different aspect, like a healthier aspect, That's not to say that all the I'm gonna get crucified for this. I'm not saying all the paranormal romances are bad out there. I'm just saying personally, I've read a few where the relationships had me a little bit concerned.
Yes, I agree.
And
Yeah.
how hard was it to not fall into the, as you said, American cliche of vampires and werewolves and so on?
I would say it was both easy and hard because Dom was very strong in my mind, he was very much like, I'm gonna be how I want to be, and if people get offended how you write me, well then too bad. But it was hard because I knew going into it that it wasn't going to be a book written to market, right? American readers expect a certain thing in paranormal romance. And I think I mixed a lot of elements that, it took a while to find their niche. It took a while to find the readership.
Yeah.
Versus, if I had written it to market like Twilight, for example, then I probably would have made a lot more money than I did at the time when the series came out.
Yeah. And you said you didn't want to fall into the trap, and you put also a new twist on the whole legend of vampires. And what I found interesting in this first book also was that you give us a little bit of background on the whole legend for those who are not aware of the legend of Vlad the Impaler.
Or the real legend.
Exactly, the real legend. And changed it maybe for the better without too much cliche, unlike maybe Bram Stoker?
Yep. I tried to do that, because to me, and I think in one of the later books, I almost write an apology of sorts to readers, because maybe I'm thinking about the vampires. But the thing is, me growing up with the Vlad the Impaler legend, it was different than what you have over here, For lack of a better word, in America, they pretty much see him as a serial killer, as a very, bad guy and whatnot. I grew up with a different version of him. I grew up with the version of the guy who would do anything for his country, for his region, who wanted to protect it at all costs, right?
Yes.
And it sort of became sensationalized in this other way. So that's what I was trying to bring out more into the books. And I would say even in the vampire series that I have, The Lost Royals of Transylvania, he he's more humanized.
Mm-hmm.
Probably more humanized than his kids, I would say.
The next generation, the bad apples of the next generation.
Yes, something like that. But yeah, so I was very much trying to, like when I brought in that story to sort of show a different side to it, doesn't mean that everyone would believe me, but that's kind of the side that I grew up with.
Yeah, I do absolutely understand, because coming from Europe ourselves and knowing a little bit about the history behind that, I mean, he wasn't worse than, let's say, most of the other rulers. I mean, like you said, it was his job to protect the borders. That what he was supposed to do, and protect them from the Ottoman Empire. I mean, his backstory is also not very nice, come to think of it.
No.
And I mean, it's psychological
He had a rough
warfare.
upbringing.
Yes, he had a rough upbringing, and what he did was, today we would call it psychological warfare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whether
it
you
was
agree
the
or
only
not.
way to get people to understand that you cannot cross into here.
Yes, exactly.
And I think it's often done that you pick one detail from a person and enlarge that and forget everything else, and that's what the person becomes.
Yes.
And it's done very often nowadays, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to do.
It's definitely
It's not definitely not the whole picture.
Yeah, but I liked it.
Yeah.
Is the Romanian word for vampires? I mean, the plural is strigoi.
We call them vampiri.
Okay.
Strigoi is more like that got sensationalized too with
this TV show,
the Vampire Academy series.
Yeah.
Strigoi for you could also call them strigoi, but I think that's more it's a different type of vampire. And like in my books, I even stayed away from that because I was like, I do not want to use that word anymore. It's been used and overused. So when I was talking about the vampires, I was using vampir, and then I was using something that I came up with called a muroni, which is like it's almost like a vampire that gets very corrupted. And those are your typical vampires that live in the caves. They can't see sunlight. They can't, whatnot. And then because of what I put in that series.
And your combination of vampire and werewolf was also quite interesting in this book, because do not separate them, not put them, but bring them together a little bit. Mix the legends and the myth.
Mix the legends, yep.
And so create something
give birth to something new.
Yeah, exactly. And are you prone to writing series then?
I would say I am very prone to it. I try to start, like standalones. I had, the best example is I had one book that was really, there was no way there was no reason to turn it into a series. It was a one book only. It's called Blazing Ashes, and it's about this girl who finds, extra powers, and she has basically the choice to save the world or destroy it. That's a one book thing, right? That's it. And then it turns out that she goes on a quest to Romania, right? In order to decide which way she's going to lean. And then she has, like an angel guardian and a demon guardian with her. And it's like, okay, now this is growing. And then, it still ended up being a one book series. But then the angel and the demon wouldn't leave me alone. So then they got their own series. And that's how it happens. It's like these characters just sort of come to life, and then I'll mind my own business. I'll be on a trip to Scotland, not doing absolutely anything other than going to castles. And then it's like, hey, you remember me? This would be a really great scene to set a fight. And I'm looking around the castle, and I'm like, it's just starting to play in my head like a movie. And I'm like, huh. And then I'll turn to my husband, and I'll be like, give me a second. Run to the gift shop, buy a notebook, jot something down real quick. It's, he laughs at me because we can't have trips where something doesn't get inspired.
Oh, well, it happens.
It's my fault.
Yeah, but I'm sure he's used to it by now.
And now you always carry a notepad with you.
Pretty much. I always bring it when he sees me packing in the carry-on. He's like, so you're spending the flight writing? And I'm like, no, it's just in case. Okay.
He knows better.
He's like, I'm going to bring books to read then.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to come back to the series, we already mentioned the Rogues Universe series with our lovely cuddly werewolves.
Yes, yes.
You have the Lost Royals of Transylvania series. It's about vampires, or more about vampires. Then you have the Sage's Legacy. It's about what I gathered was it was about ancient Egypt.
It's a mix of you can tell I have a trend through my series, you know. It's always some kind of legend or other. So that one is it's a young adult series, so it's very different to my other ones. It's probably the only young adult one that I have. And it does tie in a lot to ancient Egypt, to the ancient gods and whatnot. And it's sort of like a ghost hunters, I would say, you know, young boy, young girl, they have these powers, they can hunt ghosts that exist everywhere on earth, and it all ties back into ancient Egypt and whatnot. So,
okay. You also have the Avalon Chronicles about King Arthur. Yes. And then what you mentioned, the Demoni Sancti. Is this about those demons and angels? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That's the Angels and Demons that became a series that yes.
Wasn't meant to happen.
No, it wasn't. And then there's also the so in the Moonlight Rogues universe, there's I should say in the Rogues universe, there's the Moonlight Rogues books, so the werewolves, there's the Lost Royals, the vampires, there's Immortal Rogues, which is a gods and goddesses spin-off. So I'm really diving into like everything, like Greek mythology and you know really everything under the sun. Starting with Greek mythology because it's the easiest one to pull in the readers, but then you know it's just sort of like spins into Norse and into everything and then there's the Flaming Rogues, which is just a short duology that follows the werewolves.
Do you ever get to the point where you say, okay, that's it? That are all the stories to tell in this series or universe, or is it a continuing, I don't know, stream of ideas?
It's a continuing stream of ideas. I wish I could say I get to the point. I got to that point with Avalon, you know. I got to the point where I'm like, okay, this is it, you know, happy ending. Oh no, there's one character that didn't get their happy ending. Okay, here's a novella. That's it. I'm done. Okay, it is done. It's finished. There's nothing else to do. But I'm done. But there's Marlene. I'm like, nope, done, completely done. Okay, all right. And then, you know, it just kind of like goes away in a little corner at the back of my mind until one day I'm probably not going to be able to ignore it. And then there's going to be something else that spins off. But yeah, the rogues just, it really was meant to just be the werewolves. And people just kept coming into the story. Like Hades was never meant to be anywhere in the books. And Hades comes into the books, and then Hades becomes such an interesting character himself that it's like, well, Hades needs a story now. So Hades gets a story, but then his story ends up being the beginning of an entire series.
Of course.
So you can't win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have kind of a map where it starts and like a family tree? How all these stories fit together?
I was thinking of doing something like that. It's been on the back burner now because I was trying to. My best friend who reads all my books, the other day I was telling her what I'm doing with the new ones, and she's like, "Wait. So where is this overall in the universe?" So I grabbed these pieces of paper, right, and I'm like, "Okay, so." This is the wolves, and then, you know, I line them up, and I'm like, and then the gods start over here, and then I line them up, you know, and then I'm like, and then there's the vampires, and they start over there, and then I line them up, and then when she's looking at it, she's like, okay, that makes sense, and then she's like, you need to do this for your readers, and I'm like, I know, but like, you can enter at any point in the universe, you know, like it'll make sense for that particular series. It's just, I'm working on that. Let's put it that way. I'm working on it.
And for you, as the creator of this whole werewolf rogue universe, it's a bit like the Marvel universe now. Come to think of it,
getting bigger and bigger.
Oh my gosh,
it's getting bigger and bigger. For you personally, as the creator, who's the most, for you, who's the most annoying character?
I'm going to say right now it's probably Lucas. Because
interesting.
You know what? Hang on. As a creator, no, you know what? I'm gonna say Dominic. Because I was going to say Lucas because Lucas always kind of shows a different side to his story that makes me always wonder whether, like there's more to tell. But Dominic is the one who's such a pain in my butt. And I mean, of course, it makes sense. He's Romanian, I'm Romanian, right? Like, you're just not going to let me go. Fine. But he's the one that just shows up in every series, and just... you think you have nothing to do in the series. No, I'm here. I'm staying. I'm bringing my pack here. I'm going to live here. I'm going to interact with these people. So you got to write me in. And I'm like, okay, fine.
So maybe he's your...
So I would say
So maybe he's your favorite character.
I think, yeah, it's a love and hate relationship with him. Very much so. I love him to death, but yes, he's definitely not someone that just goes away.
Oh, no, maybe he shouldn't, because he's also a very interesting character.
Yeah.
Because you had to unearth a lot about his past he wasn't even aware of. And with the help of his friends, he learns about himself. I suppose not only during the first book, but also during the following books. I mean, what I also gathered in your Rogues Universe series is that in the first book, first of all, Dominic and Luz were the main characters of your book. Then in the second book, that changes to, I think it was Tristan
and Daniela.
And I suppose that continues with the other books.
Yes, exactly. So each book has their own couple as the primary main characters. And then, but in the background, you sort of see the story of the others develop in a sense. So what Dominic learns in the first book, you sort of see how it affects him in the second and in the third until the culmination of the last book type of thing. So, yeah.
And the way you wrote the books, or this book, the first book, and also the other ones, was you changed point of view. You have your two main characters and you get as a reader their points of view. Was that planned this way? And also first person narration? Or did you change that at some point?
The first person narration was impossible to avoid because Dominic. Let's just leave it at that. But it was my first time doing first person. No, sorry, my second time. I wrote first person, a completely different standalone novel, but I eventually changed that back to third person. This is really where I would say the series probably where I found my voice more. And writing in first person just sort of became natural. Like now it's very hard for me to write in third. But yeah, it never changed the first person. The different point of views. I originally started just with Dominic. But you can't really tell a romance story from a guy's point of view only.
Probably not.
So I soon realized that. And I realized that, Luz brings something new to the table that, it like seeing the world through her eyes, right? Seeing like almost from Dominic's point of view, you see the established werewolf. Sort of pack mentality, but from her point of view, you see just these four regular guys, so bringing that to the table in the introduction, then it became a dual point of view. And once that became a dual point of view, the others were just, yay! So yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, it was like, here we go. It's like, okay, great. Now I'm writing two stories in one. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. It was interesting to switch heads, so to speak, while reading. Her points of view and his point of view, and how they see things differently.
Yeah.
And how he also learns to, I mean, he says at the beginning, that she was or is his chosen mate, his wolf side choose her, and how he learns to accept also her way of handling him and the pack. And the others as well. I mean, she's not someone who backs down.
No,
probably
she's
need to
definitely
be.
not.
No. Yeah, it has to be. She has to be the person.
Exactly. With guys like that, you can't just let them run all over you.
Yep, exactly. I mean, she has to become this stronger personality and person for him to be his mate. Otherwise,
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
otherwise she's just a human, and he's gonna
Yeah.
spend the rest of his life just protecting her.
Yeah.
I mean, werewolves are kind of strong characters, and you need a strong character to balance
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you go under.
Exactly. Alexa, you said you grew up with all those legends and sorry, and myth and superstitions and so on. But coming to think of your other series, what about the research for this other series? How much research did you have to do, let's say, for the Arthur series and Ancient Egypt and so on?
Ancient Egypt, I'm gonna say, so for Sage's Legacy was a it was a given. I was that weird kid when I was young who was either outside playing or playing with my dog or just reading. So when internet came to Romania, like I think, well, it came into my household. I don't know where it came in the rest of the country, but in my household, we started getting we got a computer and internet around 2021, I think. So 2 years before we moved to Canada. And the first thing I did was look up the River Nile, because I'd found like a rock that on it had, something that looked like a river, that to me, for whatever reason, my brain was like, that's the River Nile.
Okay.
So I looked it up online, and then all of a sudden it turned into this big rabbit hole about ancient Egypt. And I mean, when I say rabbit hole, I mean it was an obsession for like a good chunk of my childhood, So when I wrote The Sage's Legacy, all of that was kind of fresh in my mind. So all the research from the past paid off, which was awesome. King Arthur, the Avalon Chronicles, the Arthurian retelling, was I'd read a lot of Arthurian retellings, and I don't remember what attracted me to it. I think it was probably just at a time when I was reading everything about the medieval period. And with King Arthur, I did, I remember, like watching movies just to see different portrayals and, reading more into, like what was true, what wasn't true and whatnot. But I guess the draw for me was Merlin and Vivian, who, is they call her Nimue in some versions, Vivian in others, but she's very much like this understated character that in some stories ends up imprisoning Merlin, and other stories ends up just sort of being his apprentice. And to me it was like, that's a story that wasn't told. Or it wasn't, dived into as much. And I was like, I want to do that, and to be fair, that one it came to me in a dream. I just had a very vivid dream about this girl who kept having flashbacks to a past life. And it just, for some reason, it just sort of latched onto that idea of Merlin. And Vivian, and it just became its own thing.
Okay. And may I also ask, since you said The Sage's Legacy is your own young adult series you have written so far, what would you say is the biggest difference between writing young adult fiction and adult fiction?
The mindset. Because I try to stay sort of, there's a lot of more adult worded young adult stories nowadays, but for me at the time when I was writing this, it was important to stay in the teenager mindset for my characters. So I think that's one huge thing. The other one is obviously avoiding swearing and, sex scenes. So like right now, would I be able to write a young adult? There would have to be a lot of editing involved.
and probably violence. There would be less.
Yeah. Less violence? Really?
Maybe not as
graphic. Gory graphic.
Graphic, yeah. In young adults.
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly. That's a big thing. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a difference between, would you say, then, also young adult fiction written in the United States, Canada, and Europe, or are they the same? Have they the same restrictions?
I would say they usually have the same restrictions in terms of swearing, violence, sex scenes. From what I've noticed, I don't read of it that much now, but I know, like I said, like some of the young adult in America is a bit more sexualized, versus I find the ones in Europe might have more of a plot, going on. That's not to say that American books don't have plots. They do. I'm not saying that they don't. I'm just saying the ones that I've picked up, seem to be very centered on drama, but not. It's sort of like I always kind of end up finishing the book and going, okay, but where's this going? Like where's yes, it was entertaining. There's tons of drama. There's tons of characters. There's tons of stuff happening. But where's the overarching going? And yeah, I would say that's maybe probably the biggest difference.
Okay.
For me anyway. Yeah.
And I mean, writing this kind of stories, fantasy, paranormal, suspense, romance. Yeah. I mean, right from the start, this was that you said before, okay, legends, myths are ingrained in your DNA, maybe even. Yeah. But was it really a given from the start?
I will say that I don't know how to write a story without fantasy elements in it.
Okay.
There's out of my entire catalog, I have one tiny novella that's a story about a boy and a girl and a dog that has no magic in it. And I have one standalone single book that in my head has now become a series too, which is a problem because I don't know those characters as well anymore. But that one is just sort of set in Montreal. It's got some, I guess, not mafia elements, but it's very much romance suspense, right? There's no fantasy in it. But those are the only two that I have that, have not, don't have any fantasy elements in it. Like, it's so hard for me to write something and then not have fantasy kind of slip in.
Yeah. Often certain genres have kind of rules and some things you have to touch and you have to have it in the book, in the stories. As you're mixing all these genres, are there still any rules left or are they out the window?
I will say this. When I wrote the Moonlight Rogues, rules went over my head. I'm like, I can't, like, it's just, these guys won't let me write to rules. Like, have you met them?
Well, we have.
They just do whatever they want.
Yes.
It's like, when I started writing Finn's story, I'm like, okay, by the time you get to the third book in a series, certain things are supposed to happen. You're supposed to tie off loose ends and whatnot. I mean, Finn's story just starts off this whole other thing, that he's the reason why there's flaming rogues. He's the reason why there's an entire duology based on dragon shifters. So I'm like, yeah, no, these guys just, so I gave up, trying to meet those rules and demands. But in later books, like writing the vampires, I kind of went back to them, and I also set them aside because the vampires, they're also very complicated, but there's, like I try to keep elements like the tropes, like if I have an enemies to lovers or a second chance romance or, like a slow burn romance or something like that, like I'll try to keep those in, but I wouldn't say I do it consciously. It's more like, it's like if someone asks me, how do you write books that hook readers? And my answer is, I don't know, because I don't consciously say, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, this is what has to happen. When I was writing the Moonlight Rogue series, like I was starting like in the middle and then going to the end and then going to the beginning, and then I would have to spend weeks just putting everything together in chronological order to say, wait, no, that doesn't make sense there. I think I meant this to be towards the ending.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And coming back to this beginning or end and where does it fit in, have you ever considered, or do you have a kind of a spreadsheet where you moving the different parts of the story around?
No, so I, one of my author friends is insanely good at that. He loves spreadsheets, but I don't. These are my spreadsheets, stickies.
Okay, okay. Yeah, why not? I mean, do you also have different colors of your sticky notes?
No,
no.
I basically have like I have a whatever color, like whatever stack I have.
Okay.
And then I finish it, and then I'll pick another one, but the colors don't mean anything.
Okay.
I did find out with the vampires, because I developed a lot more in those stories. Like there's like 3 running subplots that culminate into one big thing. And because of that, I had to sort of start writing things down. So I did use there's a software plotter that I used, like just sort of to write the characters down so I remember what they look like. And basically say, like in the first book, this is kind of what you're like aiming to do, and in the second book. But I did it at the beginning. I haven't been good at updating it. So now that I'm on the 4th vampire book, I basically have to go and reread books 1 to 3 to remember.
Oops, yeah.
The intricacies of what I wrote, and I know that other writers have, fantastic systems in place. I find when I have those fantastic systems in place, I can't write. It just blocks me.
So you are basically a pantser?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Okay.
But it gets a bit more difficult with one series and a big universe.
Yep. Exactly. And she has more than one. Yep. I mean, absolutely. And are there any don'ts at all in fantasy, or for you as a fantasy writer? Things you would never write or make your characters do?
I mean, I would say for me, like, rape is a big no-no. Like, I wouldn't put that in, in a book. I've put themes that I'm familiar with, like mental health, like domestic violence, or whatnot. Like Luz herself, goes through, like, her ex-boyfriend kind of attacked her and whatnot. But I'm not, I think I'm not comfortable going into this character was raped, because to me it's because these books are 1 book per character. I personally don't think that there's enough space in a single book if something like that was to happen to a character, to basically illustrate the trauma and how they sort of heal and whatnot. And I find when I read that in paranormal romance or in any romance book, it sort of upsets me, and it's a big reason why I give low star ratings to a book. It's not that it bothers me that like an author chooses to include it, but a lot of times it feels like they include rape just to sort of give that character a background story. Like this is who she is, like she or he was raped, and then therefore because of that they have this trauma, but somehow magically within the span of a book it it gets resolved. So I would say that's probably one thing. Harm to animals too. I mean, werewolf fights, you can't really avoid it, but like someone specifically harming animals, like a psychopath or something, I can't. I'm too much of an animal person,
Yep.
Like I hate it when my neighbor leaves his dog outside all day long, and I'm just like, let it go, let it go, let it go.
Yeah, I do understand.
Yeah.
Do you think that you will ever touch another genre or dip your toe into a completely different genre? I mean, you said you had this novella, but for a complete maybe series even, or
do you even want to?
Yeah, or do you even want to?
Yeah, I have a lot of, so full disclosure, I have about 52 books on the back burner right now. So about 52 ideas for different books. Some of them are in romance suspense, so it's almost like I'm sort of thinking of going back to that a little bit. But I have thought about thrillers is something like I love reading thrillers. I love reading crime fiction. I particularly love like the psychological thrillers, you know, the mind-bending ones. And that's something that, you know, I toyed with. Now, whether that's something that is going to end up being like a pure thriller or a supernatural thriller, that's debatable because, like I said, fantasy seems to have a way to just sort of slip in. But yeah, like thrillers would probably be the area that I never touched. Sort of looking forward to touch. We'll see.
Sort of maybe
if these other guys leave me alone.
yeah. Maybe incorporate them in the thriller and doing some sort of, I don't know, steampunk sort of thriller thing.
That would be interesting. That would be interesting.
And do you think, as a fantasy writer, do you think that the audience has grown in the last few years?
Overall in fantasy?
Yeah.
I would say so, yeah. Like I think there's, especially with the pandemic, I feel like a lot of people just rediscovered reading, you know, and rediscovered the joy of escape through reading. So there's been a big sort of growth in the fantasy area with that. I do also think that some people are almost switching from genres. It's like, you know, like you read romance a lot, and you're like, finally, you're like, you know what, let me try one of these paranormal romance books that people keep saying that they're really good. And then you kind of get hooked. And then you go down the rabbit hole. So there's some crossover, I would say, across the romance genres. But it's definitely grown.
Okay. And do you think that we've spoke about that quite often, Teacup, that, for example, in young adult fantasy, it seems to us, maybe we are completely wrong, correct us if we are completely wrong, we probably are, that authors are sometimes even more adventurous than in adult fiction.
With their topics.
With their topics, yeah.
I would say, yeah, that's very true. And I think because there's so many untapped niches almost in the young adult market, that all the tropes and all the themes and everything that's been covered on the adult side, not necessarily all of them have been covered on the young adult side. And there's always that different element with young adult that, you know, these characters are underage, right? And some of them are still living with their parents, or maybe they're orphans, you know, without parents or whatnot. So now you have a lot more to play with. So yeah, I think there's definitely a variety in young adult that maybe sort of got tapped out on the side of the adult. Yeah.
And would you also say for yourself as a fantasy writer, it's also about this whole world building thing that draws you to fantasy?
Yeah. I would say I'm very big on that. When I left my full-time job, I also became an editor for authors in fantasy and romance and whatnot. And that's really like my main thing, you know, for always with fantasy is world building. You know, it makes, you know, having fantastic characters can 100%, you know, drive the plot forward and get readers hooked. Having a fantastic world building can do the same thing. But if you put those things together, I mean, now you have like a gem, you know, and people will just come over and over and over to the series. So yeah, I think that's hugely important.
Is fantasy an underestimated genre still?
I think yes, because people have certain almost like stereotypes in mind about fantasy, that it's like, the warlock with the pointy hat, then, like the magic wand, then, like the soldier, or the knight with, like with the sword, and the little maiden in distress, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's changed so much. Like now you have the maiden who's wielding the sword,
Yeah.
And the warlocks are, like in any ranges,
Yeah.
of magic and whatnot. So I think, for anyone who hasn't given fantasy a try because they got put off by a novel years ago, I'd say give it another shot, because it's changed a lot. There's so many worlds you can get just sucked into, and just, it's fantastic for escaping. I use it to recharge, but yeah, I do think it's still a bit underestimated, and to some extent perhaps set aside because of all the buzz around romances, so yeah.
But you can have all the kind of different genres set within a fantasy world. It can be a romance, it can be a crime story, whatever, just in a fantasy setting, which makes it in some way a bit more interesting because there's something kind of a new world to discover.
Yeah, exactly.
Just on the side.
I love it's very true, and I love urban fantasy, like the genre of urban fantasy. It's fantastic for someone like me who likes mysteries and thrillers and whatnot, because you'll have, more often than not, you'll have strong characters, and there's always some kind of suspense, some kind of mystery, some kind of something that needs to be discovered, and I find that so interesting in an overall fantasy world build.
Yeah. And Alexa, what is your advice to any aspiring fantasy author or author in general?
I would say write what you know, and write what you know and worry about the rules later. Because I think it's very dangerous as a starting author to just sort of look at what everyone else is doing and compare your work to them and try to meet all of these reader expectations from the beginning. There's always going to be readers who hate your books. There's always going to be readers who love your books. Moonlight Rogues, when it started picking up, it got tanked on Amazon because someone didn't like that I used too much swearing in it. I'm like, these guys are mechanics. What do you think they do? Sip teas, and speak very posh. Like, that's not these guys, know? And when I originally got a review like that, I'm like, I'm like, yeah, so there's going to be people who hate on this book because there's too much of something.
Yeah.
And, so that's what I mean, like if you try to meet too many outside expectations, you kind of lose your story, and you're never going to be satisfied with it because you've lost it to what other people want out of it. So definitely just write what you want. Don't be afraid to go where, people haven't gone before, but do it in a way that is relatable with characters, where the reader can kind of follow along the journey type of thing.
I mean, be in love with your story then as an author.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess otherwise you wouldn't be able to write it.
Yeah.
Would you?
I mean, that's the question I ask myself when you hear authors say they look at the market and then they write for the market. I find that hard to follow up because, like you said, be in love with your story, be in love with your characters. How do you do that? Be passionate about your story. How can you be passionate if your main goal is the market?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think there's there's definitely there's a push because people want to make money with books, right? Like we put a lot of time and effort into them, right? We spend money on editing and on cover design and on promotions and on everything. And you sort of get to a point where you're like, okay, well, if I'm not writing to market, I'm not really selling, right? But that's not necessarily true. It's, you have to know, like, if your story has something unique, there will be a niche out there for it. 100%. Oh, you're mixing genres? There's a niche out there for that. It'll take a little bit longer, but it can definitely grow a fan base, and it can, have the impact that you want out of it on it, But when you write to market, and again, that's nothing against authors who do that. Plenty of them do that. Plenty of traditional authors do that, like traditionally published authors, self-published authors. But it also becomes a bit of not an obsession, but it becomes a bit of a trend set where almost everyone thinks that they need to write to market. And that's the only way to make money out of it. But then the other thing is, if you follow that mentality, writing to market also demands that you put out a book every 1 to 2 months in certain genres, like romance. If you're writing to market, you're expected to put out a book every month. You cannot you could be the best writer out there, but putting a book out every single month ends up taking its toll on your mental health, and on the stories eventually, because they basically just become copies of each other. Right.
I think the only difference is might be easy to find your audience. If you write what you're passionate about, apart from the market, it's harder to find the audience, but it takes longer, but you can find it.
Yeah, probably. True.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, artificial intelligence, using it to write books nowadays?
Yes. I have. I've been following that. It's interesting. I actually tried ChatGPT. I was curious about it, and I needed an email written, and I was like, well, I can't find the words, so let's see how good this thing is. It was pretty good. But then, I kind of got into, so let's see if I can, get it to write a story. And what I found is that the more human I wanted to make the story, the less it could provide that, So, and that's the thing, like, yes, like an AI can write a story. It can put, you can ask it, okay, write the same story, but put more emotion in it. It's still not going to feel like you're immersed in it, like it's not the same as having a human write it.
Yeah. So, that's what I thought. Yeah. And Alexa, what are your plans for the future? You can tell us about what the next future. I mean, the very near future. Immediate, yes.
The immediate future right now, I am working on editing. Wow, I'm completely blanking on the title. The 4th book in the Lost Royals of Transylvania series. So I am working on editing that one and releasing it for the summer, along with the 3rd in the Immortal Rogue series, where I'm going back to my roots with ancient Egypt mythology. And it's all kinds of fun. So those would be the immediate ones. And honestly, seeing if there's an ending to the Rogues universe. But I don't think I'm going to get there in the next year or two. So I do want to go back to the Demoni Sancti series because I have, the first sort of books in my head. They've been percolating at the back of my head, but they're just sort of squished in a corner by the vampires,
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, one of these days I really need to give you guys attention.
Yes. Otherwise they come knocking.
Yeah.
Won't leave you alone. You won't get any sleep.
Yeah. Well, that's exactly it, right? If I don't listen to them in my waking hours, they come into my sleep.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, well, there goes my sleep.
Yeah.
See, the expression character-driven gets a new meaning.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Most definitely.
It really does.
In your case. Yeah. And Alexa, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
No, I mean, you can find me on my website, alexawhitewolf.com. I no longer have a Twitter account. But I am on Instagram and Facebook. And I love interacting with people. I love hearing what people think about the stories. So, yeah.
Okay. Tick up? No? So, Alexa, thank you for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for having me. It was fantastic.
You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.